The flashbulbs of Paris Fashion Week weren't just capturing couture. They were illuminating a scandal set to implode a multi-million-dollar empire. At the center of it all was Vincent Beaumont, a titan of fashion publicly flaunting his new muse, an influencer half his age. But what he didn't know was that his heavily pregnant wife, the woman he'd dismissed and left weeping in their palatial apartment, was watching. She wasn't just his wife. She was the architect of his success, the silent, anonymous investor behind his entire brand. And she had just arrived at the Grand Palais, not to beg for him back, but to collect on her investment with interest. The silence in the sprawling apartment on Avenue Montaigne was heavier than the baccarat crystal chandelier that hung in the foyer. From her window, Sophia Petrova could see the late summer sun glinting off the Seine, a river of diamonds flowing through a city that now felt like a prison. At 7 months pregnant, her world had shrunk to the dimensions of this opulent flat. A world curated by her husband, Vincent Beaumont, and one from which he was increasingly painfully absent. Her fingers traced the cool rim of a porcelain teacup, the pattern an intricate dance of gold leaf and cobalt blue. It was from a set he'd bought her after their first anniversary, a time when his eyes held a universe meant only for her. Now they were fixed on screens, stock tickers, design sketches, and most frequently the glowing interface of his phone, which he angled away from her with a casualness that was more insulting than any deliberate secrecy. Vincent was the sun around which the world of high fashion currently revolved. His brand Beaumont Elegance had exploded onto the scene 3 years ago with a disruptive approach to luxury textiles. He was lauded as a visionary, a maverick, a genius who had single-handedly resurrected heritage craftsmanship with next-generation technology. His face, chiseled and perpetually tanned, graced the covers of Vogue and Forbes. He was the story everyone wanted to tell. Sophia knew the real story. She lived it, breathed it, and in a way no one could possibly imagine she had financed it. He's in a fitting Madame Beaumont. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Helene, had informed her an hour ago. He said not to wait up for dinner. Sophia had simply nodded. His fittings, his meetings, his inspiration sessions had been stretching later and later into the night for the past 6 months. Paris Fashion Week was approaching the apex of his career, where he would unveil his magnum opus, a collection built around a revolutionary, self-repairing silk composite he called Eterna. He spoke of it with a feverish proprietary passion, as if he had birthed the concept from his very soul. Sophia's hand strayed from the teacup to the gentle swell of her belly. The baby kicked a soft, insistent thump against her palm. A sad smile touched her lips. Our baby, she thought. The one thing they had created together, even if he now seemed to view her pregnancy as an inconvenience, a disruption to the sleek aesthetic perfection of his life. You're getting so maternal, Sophia, he'd said last week, his gaze flicking over her changing body with a flicker of something she could only describe as distaste. It doesn't quite fit the Beaumont brand. The cruelty of it had stolen her breath. The Beaumont brand, a brand built on her inheritance, a brand launched with the seed money she had quietly transferred from a trust her late father, a shrewd St. Petersburg industrialist, had left her. She had believed in Vincent's talent. Yes, but more than that, she had believed in him. She saw the raw, untamed ambition and thought her love and resources could give it shape and direction. She had offered him everything on one condition, that her investment remain anonymous. She wanted to be his wife, not his financier. She wanted their success to be shared, not transactional. It was a mistake of breathtaking naivety. Her phone buzzed on the marquetry table beside her. It wasn't Vincent. It was a notification from a gossip blog she'd morbidly started following, Parisian Pulse. The headline was a stiletto to the heart: Beaumont's new muse fashion king, Vincent Beaumont, gets cozy with influencer Chloe Devereaux, days before PFW debut. Below it was a gallery of photos taken just last night. Vincent laughing, his arm draped possessively around a willowy blonde in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. Chloe Devereaux, a 22-year-old with millions of followers and a vacant, symmetrical face. They were at L'Avenue, the city's premier C&B scene restaurant. In one shot, he was feeding her a raspberry from his dessert, his head tilted in that intimate way he once reserved only for Sophia. In another, his hand was splayed possessively on the small of her back as they exited the restaurant, a phalanx of paparazzi flashbulbs illuminating their triumphant departure. The teacup slipped from Sophia's grasp, shattering on the polished marble floor. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent apartment. Shards of porcelain and splashes of cold tea radiated from the point of impact, a perfect metaphor for her life. Helene rushed in her face a mask of concern. "Madame, are you all right?" Sophia stared at the wreckage, her vision blurring. She wasn't looking at the broken cup. She was looking at the broken promises, the shattered trust. For months she had lived on scraps of his affection, telling herself his distance was just stress, the pressure of the upcoming show. She had allowed him to make her feel small, cumbersome, an unattractive footnote in the epic of his success. But the woman staring at the screen of her phone was not just a heartbroken pregnant wife. She was SP Holdings, a phantom entity registered in Switzerland, the sole private equity partner in Beaumont Elegance. She owned 60% of the company. Vincent, for all his genius, was merely the CEO and minority shareholder. He was a king reigning on a throne she had built and paid for. A cold, clear resolve washed over her, extinguishing the fire of her pain. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her chest, but it was now encased in ice. He hadn't just betrayed her as a husband. He had disrespected her as a partner. He had used her faith, her love, and her money to build a pedestal from which he could flaunt his infidelity to the entire world. She looked up at Helene, her eyes clear and dry. "Helene, would you please call my driver? I need to go out." "But madame, it is late, and the doctor said you should be resting." "This can't wait," Sophia said, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor she'd felt just moments before. She pushed herself up from the sofa, her posture straighter, her presence suddenly filling the cavernous room. "And Helene, please have my black Chanel coat ready, the one with the silk lining." The one he had always said made her look formidable. He was about to find out just how formidable she could be. The black Mercedes S-Class glided through the glittering streets of Paris, a silent predator in a city high on the scent of glamour and money. Sophia sat in the back, the buttery leather cool against her skin. The city lights smeared across the tinted windows, painting fleeting streaks of gold and ruby on her pale, composed face. She wasn't weeping. The time for tears was over. This was the time for strategy. Her destination was a discreet modern building in the 8th arrondissement, home to the offices of Chen & Associates, one of Europe's most feared and respected corporate law firms. Her destination was Ava Chen. Ava was more than just her lawyer. She was the closest thing Sophia had to a friend in this city that had become both her home and her cage. Sharp, impeccably dressed, and possessing a mind like a steel trap, Ava had been the one to structure the initial investment into Beaumont Elegance, crafting the labyrinthine legal framework that protected Sophia's anonymity and her controlling interest. The elevator ascended in hushed silence. When the doors opened, Ava was waiting her usual severe black pantsuit, softened by a concerned expression. "Sophia," she said, foregoing formalities and pulling her into a careful hug. "I saw the photos. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Sophia replied, her voice firm, as she stepped into the sleek minimalist office. A panoramic window offered a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower, its lights twinkling against the inky sky. "Sorrow is a luxury I can no longer afford. I need to know our position." Ava gestured to a leather chair opposite her vast, uncluttered desk. "Our position is ironclad. You are SP Holdings. You control the board through your majority share. The intellectual property for the Eterna fabric composite was developed using funds from your initial capital injection. Legally, the patent is owned by the parent company, which you control not by Vincent personally." Sophia nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "He calls her his muse. He's positioning her as the inspiration for this collection. He's going to parade her around at the show on Saturday." "Let him," Ava said, a predatory gleam in her dark eyes. "The higher he builds his pedestal, the further he has to fall. Right now, he's arrogant and careless. We can use that." Ava slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen was a series of financial statements, highlighted with notes. "I've had my forensic accounting team doing a quiet audit for the past 2 months. I had a feeling something like this might be coming." Sophia leaned forward, her heart beginning to pound, a hard, rhythmic drum, against her ribs. "Vincent has been creative." Ava continued, her tone clipped and professional. "He's been funneling company money into a discretionary marketing budget. Except there are no invoices, no receipts, just regular 5-figure wire transfers to a holding company." Ava tapped the screen, bringing up the details of the recipient company. "Devereaux Creative Solutions." Sophia stared at the name. "Chloe Devereaux." "The very same," Ava confirmed. "He's been funding her lifestyle, her apartment on the Place des Vosges, her couture wardrobe, her influencer trips, all with Beaumont Elegance money. Your money." A fresh wave of nausea unrelated to her pregnancy washed over Sophia. It wasn't just infidelity. It was theft. A systematic, calculated plundering of the company she had funded, all to prop up the vapid existence of his mistress. "But the chief financial officer," Sophia began, "David Chen, he would have had to sign off on these transfers. He's always been so loyal to Vincent." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Ava's face. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "David is my brother Sophia." The confession hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Sophia stared at her, trying to process the revelation. David Chen, the mild-mannered, brilliant CFO who had been with Vincent from the beginning, was the brother of her own lawyer. "I know," Ava said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "It's a conflict of interest I should have disclosed, but I needed to be sure. For the past year, I've suspected Vincent was pulling David into something illicit. My brother. He's smart with numbers, but he's weak-willed. He idolized Vincent, saw him as a mentor. Vincent exploited that loyalty." Ava's professional mask cracked for a moment, revealing a glimpse of familial pain. "I've been trying to get through to him, warning him that Vincent would throw him to the wolves the second it was convenient. He wouldn't listen. He helped Vincent hide these payments, classifying them in ways that would evade a standard audit." This was the piece Sophia hadn't known. The betrayal wasn't just Vincent's. It was a conspiracy. "What does this mean for us?" Sophia asked, her voice quiet. "It means we have him on financial malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty. It's not just a personal grievance anymore. It's a corporate crime." Ava explained, her composure restored. "It gives us leverage beyond the standard shareholder agreement. We have grounds for immediate for-cause termination." Sophia looked out the window at the sparkling tower, a beacon in the Parisian night. When she had first arrived here, she saw it as a symbol of romance, of the beautiful life she and Vincent would build together. Now she saw it as a watchtower. She had been under surveillance, her every move anticipated her downfall being plotted from within her own company. But they had made one fatal error. They had underestimated her. They saw the quiet, supportive wife, not the daughter of Mikhail Petrova, a man who had built an empire from the rubble of the Soviet Union, a man who had taught her that the most important lesson in business was to know your enemy, and never, ever let them know the full extent of your power. "He wants to make a spectacle at the Grand Palais," Sophia said, turning back to Ava. "He wants to stand on that stage with his muse on his arm and be anointed to the king of fashion." "It will be his coronation," Ava agreed grimly. "No." Sophia corrected, a sliver of steel in her tone. "It will be his abdication. I'm not going to file a motion in a boardroom. I'm not going to send a letter from your office." Ava watched her, a slow smile spreading across her face as she understood. "You want to do it in public." "He chose the stage," Sophia said, her hand resting protectively on her unborn child. "I'm just going to write the final act. Get me an invitation to the show, Ava. Front row. And have all the documentation ready. The financial records, the wire transfers, the proof of my ownership. Everything. I want it ready to be sent to every major news outlet and every board member the second I give the signal." Ava Chen leaned back in her chair, the smile turning into a grin of pure predatory delight. "Sophia Petrova, it will be my absolute pleasure. He's about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman whose love he scorned and whose money he stole." The Beaumont Elegance Atelier was a hive of frantic, controlled chaos. The air hummed with the snipping of scissors, the whir of sewing machines, and the low, urgent murmur of French, Italian, and English. Bolts of the revolutionary Eterna fabric, shimmering under the stark industrial lighting, were draped over mannequins like liquid metal. This was the engine room of Vincent's empire, and he was its undisputed and increasingly tyrannical captain. "No," he barked, snatching a pair of shears from a young seamstress whose hands were trembling. "The line is weak. It must be flawless, sharp like a shard of glass. Do it again." He tossed the shears onto a workbench with a clatter that made everyone flinch. His eyes, dark and hollowed from lack of sleep, scanned the room with a paranoid intensity. In the past 72 hours, he had subsisted on a diet of black coffee nicotine and pure uncut ego. This show wasn't just a collection. It was his ascension. It was the moment he would transcend from being a mere designer to a legend, a true auteur. Chloe Devereux lounged on a velvet chaise in the corner of his private office, scrolling through her phone, artfully ignoring the maelstrom outside. She was dressed in a prototype from the new collection, a form-fitting sheath of silver Eterna that clung to her slender frame. "Vince, darling," she cooed, not looking up from her screen. "Genevieve Dubois from Vogue Paris just posted a preview piece. She's calling you the savior of Parisian couture. Isn't that divine?" Vincent strode into the office, running a hand through his perfectly disheveled hair. He glanced at Chloe, a brief, possessive smile touching his lips. She was the perfect accessory, beautiful, popular, and utterly unthreatening. She reflected his own brilliance back at him, amplifying it. Unlike Sophia, with her quiet intelligence and her probing questions that always made him feel vaguely inadequate. "Genevieve knows which side her bread is buttered on," he said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. It was barely noon. "We sent her that custom handbag last week. It's an investment in good press." "You're so clever," Chloe said, finally pocketing her phone and pouting her lips. "I'm getting so nervous for Saturday. All those people looking at me." "They won't be looking at you, my love," he said, walking over and tipping her chin up with his finger. "They will be looking at what you represent, the future, the Beaumont woman, effortless, modern, free." He let the last word hang in the air, a subtle, cruel dig at the wife he'd left at home, a woman literally burdened and bound by biology. His phone rang, and he glanced at the caller ID. Sophia. He let out an exasperated sigh and silenced the call, tossing the phone onto his desk. "Everything all right?" Chloe asked, a sliver of manufactured concern in her voice. "It's nothing. Just Sophia. Probably wants to know what time I'll be home." He scoffed. "She doesn't understand the pressure. She thinks this is all some game." "She's from another world, darling. Old money. They don't understand what it's like to build something from nothing with your own two hands." Vincent nodded, drinking in her sycophantic praise. "Exactly. She doesn't have the vision." He conveniently forgot the millions of dollars of old money that had served as the very foundation of his vision. In his mind, his success was entirely self-authored, a myth he had repeated so often he now believed it as gospel. The anonymous investor SP Holdings was just a faceless offshore entity, to him a bank, not a person he was married to. His CFO, David Chen, knocked tentatively on the door. "Vincent? The final budget reconciliation for the show's production is ready for your signature." "Bring it in, David," Vincent said, taking the tablet from him. He scrolled through the figures, his eyes barely skimming the numbers. Production lighting venue models. Security. It was all astronomical but necessary. His gaze fell on the marketing and PR line item, the one they had inflated to hide the payments to Chloe. He looked up and met David's gaze. David, a man perpetually hunched by a nervous energy, avoided his eyes, staring at a point on the floor. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed Vincent's mind. David seemed more anxious than usual. "Is there a problem, David?" Vincent asked, his voice sharp. No, not at all," David stammered, adjusting his glasses. "Everything is in order. Just, the final costs are slightly higher than projected." "Greatness costs money, David," Vincent said dismissively, signing the authorization with a flick of his stylus. "Don't get weak knees on me now. We're on the 1-yard line." "Of course, Vincent. You're right." David took the tablet and practically fled the room. Vincent watched him go, a smirk on his face. He turned back to Chloe, who was now examining her reflection in a full-length mirror. "That man would fall on a sword for me," he boasted. "As he should," Chloe said, striking a pose. "You've made him a rich man." She turned, her expression turning serious. "Vince, we need to talk about my shares. You promised. Once this collection is a success, you said you would make me a partner. Something official." Vincent's smile tightened. "All in good time, my love. Let's get through Saturday first. Once the new valuation comes in, we'll have my lawyers draft the paperwork. A small percentage as a thank you for your inspiration." He had no intention of giving her a single share. Chloe was a temporary amusement, a beautiful disposable tool. Once her utility as a muse and a public statement of his virility had passed, she would be replaced. The only partnership he cared about was with himself. He strode to the window overlooking the atelier floor. His team scurried below like ants, all working towards the glorification of his name. He was a king surveying his kingdom. He felt a surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated power. Everything was falling into place. His masterpiece collection was ready. The press was fawning over him. His beautiful, vapid mistress was by his side, and his quiet, inconvenient wife was tucked away out of sight and out of mind. He was Vincent Beaumont, and he was invincible. The throne he had built for himself, propped up by stolen money and broken promises, felt as solid as stone. Saturday evening arrived, draped in the electric blue of a Parisian twilight. The Grand Palais was a beacon of light and ambition, its magnificent glass and steel dome glowing against the darkening sky. A river of black town cars flowed towards its entrance, depositing a cargo of fashion royalty movie stars, tech billionaires, and socialites onto a pristine white carpet. The air crackled with the sound of camera shutters, a relentless, percussive roar that was the heartbeat of celebrity. This was not just a fashion show. It was a cultural event, the hottest ticket at Paris Fashion Week. And at its epicenter was Vincent Beaumont. He made his entrance precisely at 8:45 p.m., a carefully orchestrated 15 minutes late. He stepped out of his custom midnight blue Bugatti, a vision in a tailored black suit, his face a mask of confident nonchalance. The roar of the cameras intensified, but the true explosion of light and sound occurred when he turned and offered his hand to his passenger. Chloe Devereaux emerged a supernova in a sea of flashbulbs. She wore a gown of pure gold Eterna fabric, a dress that looked as if it had been spun from molten sunlight. It clung to her every curve, a second skin that shimmered and shifted with her every movement. It was a masterpiece of design and a declaration of war. By putting his mistress in the show's signature piece, Vincent was making his statement to the world and to his wife. He placed a proprietary arm around her waist, pulling her close. They posed a tableau of modern power and illicit glamour. He was the genius, she was his muse. The narrative was simple, potent, and utterly captivating to the assembled media. "Vincent, over here." "Chloe, who are you wearing?" a reporter yelled, laughing at her own obvious question. "She is wearing the future." Vincent answered smoothly into a proffered microphone, his voice a low, confident purr that was broadcast across dozens of live streams. "She is the spirit of Beaumont elegance." Inside the scene was even more breathtaking. The vast space beneath the glass dome had been transformed into an ethereal forest of white sculptural trees. A winding, illuminated runway snaked through the installation. Every seat was filled. Anna Wintour was in the front row, her iconic bob and sunglasses making her look like a stoic deity judging the mortals. Alongside her were CEOs, artists, and aging rock stars. Vincent, with Chloe still attached to his arm, moved through the crowd like a conquering hero. He accepted congratulations, clapped backs, and kissed cheeks, all while keeping up a steady stream of charming patter. "The collection is my most personal yet," he told Genevieve Dubois, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "It's about shedding the old and embracing the new. A true rebirth." The subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. He seated Chloe in the front row in the seat of honor, directly at the end of the runway, a place traditionally reserved for a spouse or family member. He gave her a lingering kiss, a performance for the dozens of cameras trained on them, before disappearing backstage to give his final instructions. As the house lights began to dim, a quiet commotion occurred near the main entrance. It was so subtle that at first few people noticed. There were no flashing cameras, no clamor of reporters. A single woman, flanked by a discreet security guard, was being shown to a seat. It was a good seat, but not in the front row. It was in the second row, slightly to the side, a spot that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of both the runway and the front row's guest of honor. The woman was Sophia Petrova. She wore the black Chanel coat, its classic lines a statement of quiet, enduring elegance in a room full of fleeting trends. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe chignon, and her face was pale but serene. She wore no jewelry, save for the plain gold band of her wedding ring. Her pregnancy was now undeniable, a gentle, proud curve beneath the expensive wool. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her composure an invisible shield. A few people who recognized her gasped. Whispers began to ripple through the rows. "Is that his wife? I thought she was on bed rest. My God, she's pregnant. This is a disaster." Chloe Devereaux, preening in her front row seat, felt a sudden chill. She saw the whispers and turned her head. Her eyes met Sophia's across the aisle. For a fleeting second, Chloe's practiced smile faltered. She saw not a weeping, defeated woman, but a figure of immense, unnerving stillness. There was no hatred in Sophia's eyes, no jealousy. There was something far more terrifying, pity. Chloe quickly turned away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She told herself it was nothing. The woman was pathetic, showing up to her husband's greatest triumph to make a scene. It was a desperate, sad move. Sophia settled into her seat, ignoring the stares and the murmurs. She didn't look at Chloe again. Her gaze was fixed on the head of the empty runway. She unfolded the show's program from her clutch. On the cover was a dramatic black-and-white photo of Vincent. The title of the collection was printed in bold, stark letters, Invictus, unconquered. A small, sad smile played on Sophia's lips. The irony was almost too perfect. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle stir of the life within her. She was not here to fight for a man who was already lost. She was here to secure her child's future. She was here to reclaim what was hers. The music began to swell, a dramatic orchestral score. The lights went down, plunging the Grand Palais into darkness, save for the glowing runway. The show was about to begin, and so was the demolition. The first model stepped onto the runway, and a collective gut rippled through the audience. She wore a pantsuit made of white eterna, tailored with razor-sharp precision. As she walked, the fabric seemed to float, catching the light like 1,000 tiny diamonds. It was architectural, yet fluid, classic, yet futuristic. It was, in a word, magnificent. The collection unfolded as a masterclass in modern luxury. There were flowing evening gowns that seemed to defy gravity, structured coats with severe, powerful shoulders and delicate blouses that shimmered like moonlight on water. Vincent, for all his moral failings, was undeniably a brilliant designer. He had taken Sophia's investment and the technology it had funded and spun it into something breathtaking. From her second-row seat, Sophia watched with a strange sense of detachment. She felt a pang of what might have once been pride. This was the vision she had believed in. This was the talent she had nurtured. She saw her money, her faith, her quiet support woven into the very fabric of every garment that floated down the runway. She was the ghost in this machine the silent partner in this grand spectacle of deceit. The audience was enraptured. Phones were held aloft, recording every look. The silent, severe judgment of Anna Wintour's front-row perch seemed to melt into visible approval. Geneviève Dubois was scribbling furiously in her notebook, her expression ecstatic. This was the show that would define the season, the collection that would cement Vincent Beaumont's place in the pantheon. Fashion gods. Chloe Devereux in the front row was glowing. She clapped delicately, after each look her face a perfect portrait of pride. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her, the star in this constellation, the muse who had sparked this genius. Each passing model was a confirmation of her own victory, a nail in the coffin of the dowdy pregnant wife hiding in the shadows. Backstage, Vincent was upon in his element. He watched the monitors with a hawk's intensity, a headset connecting him to his stage manager. "Cue lighting, change for look 24, he commanded. "Isabel's walk is too slow. Tell her to pick it up. I want power. I want hunger." His team scurried to obey his every command. He was high on the energy of the room, the palpable adoration flowing from the audience. He could already feel the rave reviews, see the headlines. His stock would soar on Monday. The orders would pour in. He had done it. He had created a masterpiece. The finale was a procession of all the models led by one wearing a bridal gown made of Eterna silk composite, a final audacious symbol of his rebirth. As the last model receded, the dramatic music faded, replaced by thunderous, sustained applause. The lights came up. This was the moment. Vincent strode out from backstage, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He jogged down the length of the runway, his arms outstretched to accept the adulation of the crowd. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling. He was a rock star, a king, an emperor. He reached the end of the runway and took a deep theatrical bow. He blew a kiss towards Anna Wintour. Then he turned and extended his hand towards the front row, his eyes locking with Chloe's. "And I must thank my muse," he said, his voice amplified by the sound system booming through the Grand Palais. "The inspiration for this entire collection. The incredible, the beautiful Chloe Devereux." He pulled her from her seat, and she joined him on the runway. The flash bulbs erupted in a blinding frenzy. He wrapped his arm around her waist, raising their clasped hands in the air, like a prize fighter and his trophy. It was the ultimate public declaration, a brazen, humiliating confirmation of everything the gossip columns had been whispering. He was publicly replacing his wife. From her seat, Sophia watched the scene unfold. She felt the stone in her chest, the one she had been carrying for months. But it was no longer grief. It was a whetstone, and her resolve had been sharpened against it until it had a razor's edge. She saw Vincent whispering something in Chloe's ear, the two of them laughing as the applause washed over them. He was so absorbed in his own glory, so blinded by the spotlight, that he had become utterly invincible in his own mind. He believed he was the author of this moment, the master of this universe. He was wrong. He was just an actor in a play she had written, and he had delivered his lines perfectly. As the applause began to subside, Vincent held up a hand, silencing the crowd for his victory speech. He tapped the microphone. Thank you all." He began, his voice thick with emotion. "When I started Beaumont Elegance, it was just a dream, a vision to create something new, something that would last forever." Sophia took a deep breath. She stood up. Her movement was quiet, but in the focused attention of the room, it was like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples of awareness spread outwards. Heads began to turn. The people in the rows in front of her shifted, creating a corridor of sight. Vincent, basking in the glow of the stage lights, didn't see her at first, but the whispers started a low hum that grew until it was a palpable buzz. His smile faltered. He squinted into the crowd, trying to see the source of the disturbance, and then he saw her, his wife, standing in the second row, her black coat a stark silhouette against the glittering backdrop, her pregnancy a clear, undeniable fact. Her face was calm, her eyes holding his. The entire vast hall of the Grand Palais fell into a sudden, shocked silence. The only sound was the faint electronic hum of the speakers. Time seemed to freeze. Vincent stood on the runway, his hand still holding Chloe's, his mouth slightly agape. The conquering hero suddenly looked like a schoolboy caught in a lie. Sophia took a single deliberate step forward into the aisle. It was time for the final act. The silence in the Grand Palais was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the triumphant energy of moments before. Thousands of pairs of eyes darted back and forth between the trio at the end of the runway, the arrogant designer and his lover, and the solitary, pregnant woman standing in the aisle. The air, once electric with applause, was now thick with the unbearable tension of a story that had just gone horrifically off script. Vincent stared at Sophia, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. It was like seeing a ghost at a banquet. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of fury. How dare she? How dare she ruin his moment, his perfect, glorious triumph with her sullen, cumbersome presence? He recovered first. A sneer twisted his handsome features. He would handle this. He would dismiss her, paint her as a hysterical hormonal woman, and regain control of his narrative. "Sophia," he said into the microphone, his voice a low, condescending purr that he hoped sounded like concern but dripped with menace. "What are you doing here? You should be at home resting. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies. My wife is not well." The collective intake of breath was audible. He had just called his visibly pregnant wife mentally unstable in front of the entire fashion world. Sophia didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply took another calm, measured step towards the runway. A security guard, unsure of his instructions, moved to intercept her. "Let her pass," a sharp, clear voice commanded from the side. All heads turned. Ava Chen, dressed in a brutally elegant black suit, stepped forward from the shadows near an exit. She held up a badge. "I'm her legal counsel. Let her pass." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. The plot had just thickened, and no one dared to intervene. Sophia reached the edge of the runway, stopping a few feet from where Vincent and Chloe stood. She was physically lower than them, but in that moment she held all the power. She looked up at her husband, her eyes clear, and filled not with rage but with a profound, dismissive disappointment. "You're right, Vincent," she said, her voice quiet, yet carrying with crystalline clarity in the dead silent hall. "I should be at home. We both should." "But you were too busy playing king." Chloe, whose hand was still clutched in Vincent's, began to tremble. Her face had gone chalk white beneath her expensive makeup. This was not the fantasy she had signed up for. "Get her out of here," Vincent hissed at the nearest security guard, his composure finally cracking. The microphone was still live, broadcasting his panicked command to the entire room. "I don't think you're in a position to give orders anymore, Vincent," Sophia said, her voice hardening. She turned her gaze from her husband to the assembled audience, the press, the buyers, the influencers. She was no longer just speaking to him. She was addressing the world. My name is Sophia Petrova. For the last 3 years you have known me only as the quiet, supportive wife of the visionary Vincent Beaumont. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. But a name you might be more familiar with, especially if you sit on the board of this company or follow its finances, is SP Holdings. A wave of confused murmuring swept through the room. SP Holdings was the legendary, mysterious private equity firm that had provided the seed capital for Beaumont Elegance. It was famously press-shy, a silent partner that had allowed Vincent Beaumont to be the sole public face of the brand. Vincent's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He stared at her, a dawning, sickening horror in his eyes. SP Sophia Petrova. The initials had been staring him in the face for 3 years, and he had been too arrogant, too self-absorbed to ever see it. That's right. Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength, resonating with the authority he had never known she possessed. I am SP Holdings. I am the sole anonymous investor who provided 100% of the startup capital for Beaumont Elegance. I am the majority shareholder controlling 60% of the company you are all here to celebrate tonight. The silence was replaced by a roar of shocked gasps. Cameras, which had been lowered, were now raised again, no longer aimed at the fashion, but at the raw, unfolding human drama. This was a story far more compelling than any dress. This revolutionary Eterna fabric, Sophia went on, gesturing to the golden dress clinging to a horrified Chloe Devereaux, was developed at a Swiss laboratory, a project I personally greenlit and funded with an additional 8-figure capital injection last year. Vincent didn't invent it from a stroke of genius. He was merely the creative director assigned to the project I paid for. She had systematically taken apart his entire legend in less than a minute. He wasn't the visionary. He was an employee. He wasn't the king. He was the court jester, and his reign was over. She finally turned her attention to the trembling woman beside her husband. And you, Miss Devereaux, this beautiful gown you're wearing, your apartment on the Place des Vosges, your expensive holidays, I'm so glad you've enjoyed them, because I paid for those as well. Ava Chen chose that exact moment to step forward again. She handed a small, innocuous-looking USB drive to a stunned-looking reporter from the New York Times in the front row. On that drive, Ava announced in a voice that cut through the chaos, you will find the complete financial records of Beaumont Elegance, detailing multiple unauthorized wire transfers from corporate accounts to a shell company owned by Miss Devereaux, was all signed off by CEO Vincent Beaumont and CFO David Chen. Consider it an exclusive. The reporter looked at the drive in her hand as if it were a bomb. In a way, it was. The name drop David Chen was the final devastating blow. The mention of the CFO transformed the scandal from a messy public divorce into a full-blown corporate coup implicating others and hinting at a deeper conspiracy. Vincent finally let go of Chloe's hand as if she were on fire. He stumbled back a step, his face a mask of utter devastation. The spotlight that had been his coronation glow now felt like an interrogation lamp. He was exposed, stripped bare, in front of the entire world he had worked so hard to conquer. He looked at Sophia, at the woman he had dismissed, cheated on, and underestimated. And for the first time, he saw her not as his wife, but as the architect of his ruin. And in her calm, steady gaze, he saw no path to victory. he saw only the checkmate. The Grand Palais descended into chaos. The carefully curated atmosphere of elite sophistication shattered into 1,000 pieces. Reporters were shouting questions, their voices a cacophony of accusation. Guests were on their feet, phones held high, live streaming the corporate execution to a global audience. The models who had been waiting backstage for their final walk with the designer peeked out from behind the curtain, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. On the runway, under the full glare of the house lights, the three central figures of the drama were frozen in a tableau of ruin. Chloe Devereaux was the first to break. A sob escaped her lips, and she covered her face with her hands, the gold Eterna fabric of her sleeves bunching around her tear-streaked face. Her dream of becoming a brand partner, a fashion icon, had just evaporated. In a matter of minutes, she had been rebranded from a muse to a kept woman paid for with embezzled funds. Her influencer career was over. Vincent Beaumont was a statue of disbelief. His mind was a maelstrom of denial and rage. "Lies," he finally croaked into the microphone, his voice hoarse. "These are all vicious lies. She's a scorned woman trying to destroy me." But his words lacked conviction. The evidence was already out there, a digital poison arrow shot into the heart of the world's media. His denial sounded hollow pathetic. The narrative had been ripped from his control. Sophia simply shook her head, a gesture of pity more damning than any insult. "The truth is not a matter of opinion, Vincent. It's a matter of record, and the records are now public." Ava Chen, ever the strategist, made her next move. Furthermore, she announced, her voice ringing with legal authority, pursuant to clauses 12.4 and 15.1 of the primary shareholders' agreement of Beaumont Elegance S.A.S.P., Holdings is hereby calling an emergency virtual board meeting effective immediately. She held up a tablet, its screen already showing the faces of the other three board members, a Swiss banker, a London-based retail magnate, and a stern-faced Japanese industrialist, all looking grim and utterly poleaxed. They had clearly been pre-warned and were on standby. An email notification had likely just pinged on their phones, containing a link to the same dossier the New York Times reporter now held. "The primary agenda item," Ava continued, "is the immediate for-cause termination of CEO Vincent Beaumont on grounds of gross financial malfeasance, embezzlement of corporate funds, and actions bringing the company into severe public disrepute. All in favor?" On the screen, 3 hands went up almost immediately. There was no discussion. There was no deliberation. It was swift and brutal. "The motion carries," Ava declared into the stunned silence of the room. "Vincent Beaumont is hereby removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer and stripped of all executive authority, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." 2 large men in black suits, who had been standing discreetly by the exit, began to walk purposefully towards the runway. It was then that Vincent finally broke. The sneer, the arrogance, the charisma, it all melted away, revealing the terrified narcissistic man beneath. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No. This is my company. My name is on the building I built this—" "You built nothing." Sophia's voice cut through his desperate rant. It was the first time that she had shown a flicker of emotion, a cold, righteous anger. "You were given a chance. You were given my trust, my support, and my capital, and you used it to disrespect me, to steal from me, and to build a monument to your own ego. The name on the building is just a brand, and as the majority owner, I can change it to Petrova Couture tomorrow morning if I wish." That final threat seemed to slap the fight out of him. He looked from Sophia's unyielding face to the approaching security guards, to the thousands of phones capturing his humiliation. He was trapped. There was no escape. He turned and fled, not with a defiant stride, but with a panicked, stumbling run. He scrambled backstage, disappearing from view. His exit met not with applause, but with a new wave of frantic shouting from the press. Chloe was left alone on the runway, a gilded statue of shame. She looked wildly around as if searching for an escape route, before she too turned and hurried backstage, her golden dress, once a symbol of triumph, now looking like a cheap costume. The show was over. Sophia stood for a moment longer, a solitary, powerful figure at the edge of the stage. She placed a hand on her belly, a silent promise to the child within. This was for you. This legacy, this future is for you. She turned without another word and walked back through the aisle, Ava Chen falling into step beside her. The crowd parted for them, as if for royalty. The whispers that followed her now were not of pity, but of awe. They had not just witnessed the fall of a king. They had witnessed the ascension of a queen. Outside the Grand Palais, the ripple effect was already beginning. News alerts were blasting onto millions of phones worldwide. Beaumont CEO fired in shocking Fashion Week coup, read one headline. Wife revealed as secret billionaire investor, exposes affair and embezzlement, screamed another. The hashtag #BeaumontDown was trending globally within 10 minutes. In a quiet corner of the city, David Chen sat in his darkened apartment, his phone buzzing incessantly on the table. He watched a live stream of the events, his face ashen. His sister Ava had warned him. She had told him Vincent would burn him without a second thought. He had made his choice, hitched his wagon to a falling star, and now his career and reputation were being incinerated in the blaze. As Sophia slid into the back of her waiting Mercedes, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. The gilded cage was broken. The silence in her apartment would no longer be one of loneliness, but of sanctuary. "It's done," she whispered more to herself than to Ava. "No," Ava replied, a rare, genuine smile on her face as the car pulled away from the media circus. "It's just begun." 3 months later, the golden letters on the glass doors of the headquarters on Avenue Montaigne no longer spelled out Beaumont. They spelled Petrova. Inside, Sophia Petrova, now just weeks from her due date, commanded the boardroom that was once her husband's personal fiefdom. She had assumed the role of CEO not just as a shareholder, but as the celebrated visionary who had turned scandal into triumph. The air, once thick with fear and ego, was now alive with collaboration and respect. The world had watched the fallout. Vincent Beaumont vanished into a litigious exile, a pariah stripped of his company and his name. But from the ashes of his deceit, Sophia forged a new legacy. The company, under its new identity, soared. The Phoenix Collection, as she had rebranded it, became a global bestseller, a symbol of resilience. Profits were diverted to a new foundation she created to fund female entrepreneurs, transforming her private pain into public purpose. The brand was more valuable than ever, its story now one of integrity and female power. That evening, standing in the peaceful nursery, she had designed her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "I am sorry." It was him. A lifetime ago, those words might have broken her. Now she felt a quiet, hollow pity. It was the plea of a ghost from a life she no longer lived. With a calm finality, Sophia deleted the message and blocked the number forever. Placing a hand on her belly, she looked out at the glittering expanse of Paris. It was no longer a gilded cage. It was her city, her company, her future. And she, Sophia Petrova, was just getting started. Sophia Petrova's story is more than just revenge. It's a powerful testament to reclaiming one's own narrative. She transformed the deepest personal betrayal into a monumental professional triumph, proving that a woman's strength is often forged in the fires of adversity. She didn't just expose a liar. She dismantled an empire built on deceit and rebuilt it as a legacy of integrity and power for her unborn child. Her journey from a silent partner in the shadows to a celebrated leader in the spotlight is a reminder that the most brilliant comebacks are planned not in moments of rage, but in quiet, calculated resolve. If her journey from betrayal to boardroom boss resonated with you, if you believe in the power of turning pain into purpose, then show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories of incredible resilience. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story of justice served and power reclaimed.